Welcome to the show. YouTube has been on a warpath, deleting COVID-19 related videos. I myself have been a victim of this censorship, with YouTube removing my interview with Mark Grennan. It's a very powerful broadcast. I urge the viewers to check that out if you haven't seen it already. Links will be in the description to the BitChute channel. You'll be able to find it there. So anyone that's had videos deleted, I feel your pain. On to other news, we have Anastasia Palaszczuk faking a flu shot. Mass deception, fear and propaganda has been pushed on the public. Many people are downloading the COVID Safe app, which is a complete breach of privacy. Tyrannical measures are being put in place here, folks. But now I'd like to introduce today's guest, where we'll be discussing these subjects and more. So, joining us is Gavin Seam, an American libertarian and activist, as well as a filmmaker and photographer who has exposed enormous amounts of corruption. Thanks for appearing on the show, Gavin. How are you going?
Hey, Jeff. Thank you. Good to be here. Doing well.
That's really good. Now, you had a viral video called Citizen Pulls Over Cop, and it went viral. Excellent job. Please enlighten the viewers on how that came into existence.
That was quite a while ago. That was back in 2014 before I left the States. Yeah, I guess that was one of my more viral videos. I had numerous ones, but for some reason that one resonated. It's strange, I think, for activists, because sometimes I think we feel that the videos that should be going viral are the ones that everyone's ignoring, and the ones that are going viral are the ones that maybe are relevant, but they're more just for entertainment, right? They want to see us get arrested. They want to see us have guns pulled on us. Really, people want, I think, there's a problem, and I think we all have to correct our thinking, is we have a tendency to want entertainment. We want Hollywood, right? But we want it for real. We want bullets actually flying. And I think we're conditioned to think that that's what excitement is. And I think people that are watching videos don't necessarily realize that, you know, when you're an activist, there's real danger. It's not a movie set. But that was back in 2014, and it was just the same old thing that we're seeing in the US and across the pond there. I'm guessing they're doing the same crap. It seems like a very European thing to do, although maybe less so in some of Europe. We do this thing in the US where they have these ghost cars that are just unmarked, and they're just, I mean, let's be honest, these cockroaches, they're just parasites that are crawling around the streets looking for reasons to extort people. And it's not about safety, it's not about prevention. If you want to slow somebody down, right? Those of us that drive, you know that if you're driving along and you see a police officer quietly parked on the side of the road with his light bar on and his stickers blaring all over the place, the first thing you do is what? You check your speed and you hit your brakes. So there's really no denying that these ghost cars are simply to generate revenue. In Washington State, where I was from, those are illegal. Now, that's not necessarily a unilateral law, that's a state level law, but they're not allowed to do traffic enforcement in unmarked vehicles, and yet they just completely ignore it and do that anyhow. So we had a huge conversation about that. Some other activists before me had talked about it. And then I did this video, and it really blew up because I actually flagged the officer over. I stopped him essentially and said, hey, this is why I pulled you over. The sad backstory to that is that really here we are, 6 years later, nothing's really changed. I mean, yes, in a very local sense, the sheriff marked their police cars. A few of the police communities in the state marked their police cars. Huge conversations were made. Other people started questioning the cops. So there was a tiny level of pushback and accountability because people said, well, hey, this is relevant. I mean, this is a very real thing. And anywhere there's unmarked cars, I mean, frankly, they shouldn't be tolerated, because an unmarked car says if you see red and blue flashing lights, you stop, period. In Washington State, it's a felony to elude police, which is ridiculous. You should have a right to elude a cockroach, but it's a felony. And so if you got your 16-year-old daughter's driving down the road at 12 o'clock at night, all it takes is a phone app that flashes red and blue, and she's going to stop for that person. So the narrative, I think that's why it took off, is because the narrative is so fundamentally obvious, but at the same time, the government then came back and they said, well, we need to make new laws. So we need to take away this law that prevents us from doing this. I mean, it definitely caused a stir in the state. But here I am, a refugee in Mexico now, because standing up in the US, of course, eventually gets you killed or in prison. And this is true in a lot of countries, but I just felt the need to say, okay, let's go, because the fact is no one's resisting. There's a handful of us. There's 1,000 that's resisting, and the rest of the people are just watching on YouTube and laughing at the situations we get ourselves into. And I get it. Like, we don't want to get screwed over. No one wants to go to jail. They got bills to pay and debts to pay and jobs. But the problem is, if only one resists, there's really no resistance.
Well said. And that was a very courageous act. The predatory behavior and the corruption in the police force is rampant. They feel that they're above the law, and they get a kick on standing over members of the public and enforcing their authority. It's a power trip. And by holding them accountable for their actions, as well as recording them, that is very important. As soon as you hit record, that way they know that, you know, they're on camera and they're going to be held for their actions. So that's really remarkable.
Yeah. Unfortunately, at least in the US, they're getting so used to the cameras that now they're just murdering people on camera and getting away with it. Now, I don't know if the police in Australia are this aggressive and this blatant about it. The US is a rather unique case. There's very few places in the world where the police are as overtly violent on the street. It's very strange. It's kind of an anomaly, I guess. But we have such a police worship culture. And I think this is the problem. It's why there's no resistance. Even down here in Mexico, where, sure, there's a lot of corruption, there's a lot of problems, and with all this COVID crap, you know, there's a lot of BS going on. But police don't get away with simply shooting people on the side of the road or kicking teenagers in the head because they stole a candy bar from a convenience store. I mean, people will intervene here. They will pull them off. They will wrestle them. And that happens. What's funny here, in contrast to U.S. culture and Latin culture, it's not that rare to see police trying to arrest someone, and there's a group of people wrestling physically with the police officer, and nobody's like beating their heads in with rocks. I mean, it's hilarious because I've seen videos where an officer will have one man in a headlock and another man will be pulling on him and another man will be pulling on the police officer, and they'll all be having a polite conversation while doing this. And so it's very surreal because in the U.S., at least, our police are, well, they're absolute psychopaths, and they're trained this way. It's coordinated this way. It's almost like if you're not a psychopath, you get cut from the force anymore. And I've known people that tried to be police that went through the training and then they said, no, I'm not doing this. And so this is a very consistent problem. The police agenda is controlled on a federal level. It's a fear tool. It's a power tool. And if the people are afraid of government, there's tyranny. And that's what we have now. The government is no longer afraid of the people, but the people are simply afraid of the government.
That's right. It's very unfortunate. And that's a prerequisite, it seems, these psychopathic tendencies that a lot of these officers portray. And yeah, they need to be removed from the force. We need a radical overhaul of the system. We're seeing all types of abuse of power, stealing evidence from the evidence rooms, taking bribes, even, you know, letting people go as long as they get the cash, all types of underhanded tactics. And you know, and a lot of when it gets brought to light, they investigate themselves and then clear themselves of any wrongdoing. The way it's structured, it's really not geared to protect and serve. It's very unlawful. And
well, and I'm assuming, like, you tell me, in Australia, I think you're from Australia because I'm pretty sure you're not allowed to have that accent. You're not from Australia, but. Would you see the U.S. news and you see our videos? Would you say your police are aggressive to that level there, or is it a different culture there?
Not to the extreme. We do see a lot of police brutality on a lot of elderly patients in hospitals. We see it all, and disabled folks being sprayed down. Yeah, we see it all, but not to the extent of the shootings. We see a lot of...
Right, it's not quite as bad, but yeah, I'm hearing a lot of stories more and more out of Australia, just absolutely draconian suppression laws, basically, of free speech and things like that. And I don't know how much they're being enforced, how many, I mean, really no one in the world beats the USA for the prison population per capita. It's one of the I would call it a fourth world country, because all of the so-called third world countries have less abusive justice systems for the most part than the USA does, just on the numbers alone. So that's one of the reasons that I got out, is I think you can measure the freedom of a place not so much by its laws. The laws on the books are relevant, but what's more relevant is what people are doing in reality, how much freedom they're getting away with. I hate to use that phrase, getting away with, but in a way, it's like we're like criminals if we want freedom anymore. So how much freedom they're getting away with, how much murder from the government there is on the streets, how many of the people are the government killing, how many of the people are the government sending to the camps, like we are in the USA. And so if you measure freedom based on how much freedom you're actually getting away with having, then now the countries are sorted on a completely different level, instead of on the level of here's what the official reports and the justice system reports and the global human rights reports say.
Yes, very much so. And that's very diabolical. The prison industrial complex, the privatized
Yes.
prisons, you have people profiting from others that are incarcerated. That's very evil, isn't it?
It's crazy, and it's madness. But what's, I think, really disturbing is how much our society has come to be brainwashed, and whatever the media tells them, that's what they repeat. And I think the COVID situation is an amazing example of that, because I don't think anywhere in human history people say, well, no, it has to be real, it has to be this as bad as they say, because otherwise it wouldn't be happening across the world. And I'm like, you don't get it. All they had to do, the only people they had to whore with is YouTube and Facebook. As soon as they had the banners up on those things telling everybody in their native language across the planet, this is what's happening, here's how you should be afraid. And everybody said, oh, I should be afraid. This is what they say. We have to submit. We have to be afraid. And so we have a situation now where essentially across the world, the global economy is being destroyed, people's jobs, their livelihood. The future's pretty uncertain. Who knows whether in 6 months we'll have millions dying of starvation. Maybe it won't be that bad, but with the rate we're going and the level of fascism we're seeing over what is effectively the seasonal flu, based on the numbers and the facts and the data and the science. But what's happened, and this is where it goes back to all the activism we're doing, it's really all the same human rights message. When the government can unilaterally take away fundamental rights like work, like travel, fresh air, going outside, getting sunlight to build your immunity and your health, going jogging, riding bicycles, going swimming. If you had said 5 years ago that the government could unilaterally ban those things across the world and people would tolerate it, we would have been laughed at. And here, in a matter of a few months, using a simple message of propaganda on social media, and regardless of what listeners think, maybe some people think this is more serious. I've studied this pretty extensively, the science of it, and the numbers, the science just doesn't check out with what the government is telling us. But regardless, what I tell people when they say, oh no, we got to worry, I'm like, you know what? I don't live in fear. I try to have faith in God. I try to have self-control. I try to love my neighbor. And at the end of the day, wherever you believe on all those things, whether you have faith, whether you don't, the fact is, if you want to choose to tremor in fear and sit on your couch and let your immunities go down while you hide in your house, that's fine. You have a right to do that. I might think it's silly. I would say that all the medical science we have for the past 100 years defies that as being logical. I don't know how suddenly that's a logical thing to do. However, to tell other people, to tell the world they have to do that, is a level of fascism that I think we've never seen on a global scale. And it's very disturbing. I think the future is looking a little uncertain, because I'm blown away by how many people, even people that I would say normally are pretty awake, are falling for this. Simply fear. Oh, you might die of sickness. You might die of sickness. And the fact is, it's not happening, right? The death rates are not different than something like the flu, markedly, if you look this up. And I could talk for an hour about the science of this, and I don't know if we need to focus on that, but I think the emphasis should be, it really doesn't matter if the Black Plague is in town. Human rights are never suspended. Your right to work, your right to travel, you always have a right to stay home and starve if you want to. But it doesn't matter how bad the plague is. It's up to the individual. The government isn't your daddy. They don't decide your health. The grocery store telling you have to wear a mask to go shopping. Since when did the clerk at the grocery store become my freaking doctor? I mean, we lost our mind. And so there has to be a sensibility. And in times like this, and the government uses this, people say, oh, well, I normally agree with you, but you're just far off the rails. People's health is important. My health, your health and security are secondary to freedom, period. And if you don't look at that way, you can never have freedom.
Excellent analysis of what's taking place at the moment. With all the fear mongering from the mainstream media, people are panicking. They're imposing all these measures that are having way more catastrophic consequences than COVID-19 itself. So we're seeing people's businesses collapse, people's marriages go down, a lot of the divorces, suicide rates. It's really worrisome. And the Constitution, a lot of that's being waived. FEMA's come in, they're just taking over, and it's people are having dire consequences from this, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly. And we're seeing, I think, the fallout from the medical fallout from the sequestration alone is going to do more damage than the virus in the end. But even if it doesn't, I mean, these numbers of this virus are more or less the same as any flu season. But that's the beautiful thing, or I should say the ugly thing that's remarkable, the level of simplicity to the cleverness. Now, I don't quite know what the end game is, right? If you're a tyrant and you're a ruler, what the end game is, I get that you want power, you want to control people, but it seems like they're also walking a thin line here, because if you destroy the global economy, I mean, we've never destroyed the global economy, I don't think, to this level. So I think in a way, I think they're in over their head, even though it's intentional, even though I think they are using this for power, because there's no way, I know the local politicians are falling for the propaganda, but there's no way at the high levels that they don't know that this is a farce. Because, I mean, surely they have people that can do math on their stats. They have doctors, and we're seeing more and more even normal doctors just coming out and saying, no, this is not what's happening. Look at Sweden, look at some of the Latin American countries, a few of them that are not locking down. They're not seeing any more growth of this. This is just normal sickness things. And the fact is, people say, I had somebody who was talking to today, and they're like, well, 250,000 people have died. And I said, you realize that's not a lot, right? Like, if you isolate that number, and like, oh, did you know 250,000 people died today? Everybody's gonna be like, oh my goodness, that's terrible, that's horrible. And yes, it sucks. But the fact is, life ends in death. And the truth is, 250,000 people die of respiratory-related conditions and variants like this of the flu, the coronavirus strains, all this kind of stuff every year. More. This is normal things that are happening. And it sucks, but this is normal. This isn't a strange thing. It's not a crisis. It's the circle of life, as Disney likes to say.
Yes. And then we're seeing outrageous cases of misdiagnosis, people with heart attacks, other people that are dying from underlying causes, and then they're being diagnosed as COVID-19, so the hospital can get a stimulus package, they can get monetary incentive if they put someone on a ventilator. We're seeing a lot of that, and we're seeing a lot of bizarre videos coming out, empty hospitals, doctors and nurses.
Oh, it's everywhere, even here in Mexico. You go to the hospital, there's nothing there. And the fact is, here's the scary part of all this. They're spreading all this propaganda based on these numbers. Look how many people are sick. Look at our models. Look how many people are dying. So you take that data, you isolate it from normal data that tells people. Imagine if they were saying, okay, here's what's happening with the virus. It's important to understand this is happening every year. The numbers aren't that much higher. We just need to be aware, and we need to be careful, right? If that was the message, we'd be seeing a very different world right now. But you don't have to dig very deep. You don't have to get into the fringe conspiracy channels to realize that something's wrong. I mean, you can take WHO numbers. You can look at CDC numbers. You can look at papers from medical universities, from hospitals. There was one from Utah, University of Utah, about the PCR test that effectively exposed that the PCR test is the primary test that's used to determine positive of COVID-19 is not necessarily accurate. In fact, but then you dig into it deeper and you realize the PCR test doesn't even really test for COVID-19. It tests for a wide range of viruses. So what they're doing is they're actually using an old test. It detects a wide range, and if it shows positive, even though it's not even accurate, even though having had a vaccine in the past can make it trigger positive, and even though it doesn't even specifically identify COVID-19, it identifies a positive based on all these other viruses, they're saying, no, it's COVID-19 because we tested positive. And the majority of the numbers you're seeing are PCR positive tests, is what these numbers are based on. And so, everybody's like, oh, you're just a conspiracy theorist. This isn't theory. This is medical science. And the problem we're seeing, and I think that we're seeing in all human rights violations, in pretty much all state propaganda, science is thrown out the window. If you actually go and dig up videos from doctors on the internet right now, they're saying, no, we should be careful. Here's what we're dealing with. Here's the numbers. And this is the reality. And these are people that are not out there, right? Even from a mainstream perspective, these are people that normally believe in the system, and they're saying it's wrong. You dig skin deep on the science and you realize that what you're seeing on the news is not science. It's not medical science. It's not any science. It's simply, it's the science of propaganda, and that's the only science there is. It's the science of social manipulation, and that's what we're seeing. And that's what we're seeing with all the things. That's what we see with why police should have unmarked cars. Oh, we have to stop those fast speeders, right? We have to stop the people that are really endangering the public. Well, no. You wanted to stop people from going too fast to the school zone. You would have a cop car parked on the end, and they would slow down when they saw it. You would have a speed bump coming into the school zone to slow them down. It's funny because down here in Mexico, we have corruption for sure, but there's very few speeding stops. People rarely get stopped for speeding. And the way that speeding is dealt with in town, for example, in a school or really anywhere in town, there's topes everywhere. A tope is a speed bump. And sometimes they're outrageous. They're not really built very well to code. Sometimes they're way too tall. Sometimes you scrape the bottom of your car on them. So they're a little bit out there. They could use a little more organization. But the fact is, you don't need traffic enforcement for speeding. And there's very little of that. I've never received a speeding ticket. I feel like the guideline is as long as you're not going double the speed limit, you're probably fine here. It's not that you can't, or that in certain areas they don't do speeding enforcement. The parasites are everywhere, but it's not a major means of revenue in most of the cities. If you're driving by the school, you will slow down, because if you don't, you'll break your axle. And so it's a very non-force-based method. And when people, so everything's propaganda. Well, we have to have the unmarked cars because we need the aggressive drivers to slow down. Actually, no, you don't. All you need is a speed bump in the area where that's a problem. And within a week, everybody will be pacing their speed, because the guy that's driving through there at 80 miles an hour will be replacing his CB joint.
And in a normal world, that's how it'd be structured. But it's geared towards revenue raising. They're trying to make a profit. It's a big business. And they have quotas that they have to meet. And that's the way they enforce it. It's not looking after the public. It's not trying to protect anybody. That's just an illusion. And the fear-mongering, all of their mainstream media, what they're pushing, these scare tactics. At least people have the right to bear arms in the US. We see gun sales are going right through the roof. People all the way down to the corner lining up. They have no right to restrict gun sales, do they?
They don't, but they do, and it's a weird thing as an activist and having done a lot of gun rights activism, and people saw me as a gun rights activist, and then they saw me as an unmarked car activist. And eventually, I think maybe they started to realize that I just wanted accountability on everything. It's interesting because in Mexico, on the books, guns are more restricted. And so you don't see the posturing, like, oh, look at me, I'm carrying my AR at the grocery store to show how macho I am, which is fine. I respect someone's right to do that. I mean, I had lots of friends that did that, and I did rallies where people were carrying guns like that, because I think the right to defend yourself is simply a human right. On the other hand, and I think it's important for people not in the USA to understand what's happening. The USA doesn't have more freedom. They have more theater. Just like our security is theater, our TSA is theater, our health system is theater. In a way, our gun rights are theater too. Unfortunately, and I have a lot of friends in gun rights and the Patriot movement, and some of them are really great people, but as a whole, the quote Patriot movement is the first in line to lick the boots of police. They're the first in line to abuse the rights of the immigrant, or even the person from the party they don't like. And so there's a lot of this going on. Like, it's all about freedom, right? But really it's about freedom for people who think like me, which is why I never quite fit in with any faction, be it libertarian, left, right, patriot, you know, it doesn't matter, because I was always like, no, it's about freedom for everyone. Like, it's okay if you don't like Black Lives Matter because they have masks on and you think they're bad people, as long as they're not hurting anyone, you have to get over yourself, right? Just because their message doesn't agree with you. And the problem with gun rights is in the USA is we really have no gun rights. We have gun permissions. So the fact is, all those lines of people lining up to get guns, every one of them is tracked and logged. Every one of them is asking permission. They're going into those stores. The stores are 100% compliant with the government, and they're getting permission every time from our corrupt federal government to own that gun, or getting denied, as the case may be. And the fact is, that's not a gun right. Those people buying those guns know that they can show off. It's really a toy. It's a cool toy. It's a good toy to have in your house. But the fact is, as we saw at the Oregon standoff at the Bundy Ranch, which I was at in 2014, a lot of these things, what we saw is, if anyone actually stands up with guns, even if they don't use them for any violence whatsoever, they're still going to prison. So what patriots, as they call themselves, or 3% or whatever, now know is they buy those guns, but the same people lining up to buy guns are waving a blue line flag saying we support the police, which are the #1 most violent terrorists in our country, the most anti-gun, the most anti-law, the most anti-constitution. And the truth is, then you come to a country like Mexico, where yes, the gun rights are more restricted on the books. You can't just walk into a gun store and buy a gun everywhere. But the fact is, if you want a gun, it's not hard to get. Tons of people have guns in their homes. They're just not advertising it. They're not parading on the street saying, look at me. That's not their culture. They don't have a culture of, look at us, we're going to be violent if you mess with us, right? And US has a culture kind of based on that. We inherited that from England, and it's kind of this, honestly, we kind of have an asshole culture, right? If you mess with me, I'm going to kill you. And I'm a gringo. I get the principle of we're going to defend our rights. We have a right to use any means necessary to defend our rights. And I absolutely stand by the right in any place in the world to possess those arms. But at the same time, what I've learned over the years is the person talking the biggest about how they're going to be badass with their gun is the first one to put it away and to go running when the police come. And so I think there's a difference between actual defense and what's on the books in the law. In Mexico, the militias, sure, there's a lot of people doing what they're told, but there's militias, they call them auto defenses here. And when the militia stand up, they're not asking, they're not shaking the hands with the police and saying, is it okay if we have guns? The militias are running around their communities with turret-mounted machine guns. And when that happens, it's because the community has arrived at the point where they're saying the corruption and the violence is intolerable. The government's not protecting us, and we're going to do it for them because it's our right to protect our community. And while certainly there are people that go to jail for illegal gun possession, which isn't actually a crime that exists in real law, in the US, you have people serving decades, thousands and thousands of people for simply possessing guns. And so it's a very different culture. So again, go back to who's in prison and who's being killed. Because the theater we see on the street, imagine if you're a tyrant and you're like, hey, we have a culture of guns. How do we get rid of them in the next 20 years? Well, maybe we don't need to take the guns like Australia did, like a lot of European, like England did. Maybe the better solution is to let them have the guns to make them think that the rights are still intact. But actually, there's so many rules and regulations. They're so afraid to actually use the guns that they'll simply be thanking us for letting them have the toy to go out to the gun range and go hunting with. And that's what I see, especially now that I'm on the outside looking in the USA.
It can become a complicated situation in that regard, but it's better to have options if you're faced with a home invasion, whatever you can use.
Of course.
Yeah, to give you that peace of mind. But yeah, what we're seeing, people are worried now about the application that they're downloading on people's phone, the COVID Safe app. It's all data collection, tracking devices. They're implementing these surveillance methods, Big Brother. they have ulterior motives, and there's many agendas at play
Always.
here, isn't there?
Data is power, and if you have information, that's power, and people vastly underestimate that. Obviously, our smartphones and things can be used as tools for good, and of course, they're used against us also. That's how any tool or any weapon always has been all throughout history. But if you're actually downloading the government app to keep you safe from COVID, if you're putting a stay-at-home banner on your Facebook, everything you're doing is like you're being moved into the sheep camp. You're the ones ready for the trains. These are the ones we've convinced. And as soon as you fall for that, if you think every scrap of that data, who put I stand with this person, I stand with that person on their profile, who put stay at home, who put, all this stuff, who put their frame around their photo, who downloaded the app, what are they doing with the app, where they're going, everything is a data point. And I'm a marketer, and I look at data all the time in marketing. And even on the consumer end, the amount of data that I can target as a marketer for Facebook ads, for example, is enormous. The algorithms that Google and Facebook and the government and all these companies have going together are unfathomable. So think it, just be aware of it. I don't think it means we don't use the tools. Some people say, oh, I won't go on Facebook because they track you. I'm like, well, if you're not on Facebook, you're just being tracked some other way. Like, you still have the smartphone in your hand. So I think it's a lot smarter than to say, I think it's a little bit like saying guns hurt people, so don't use guns. To say smartphones are data trackers, so don't take a camera with you, don't have a phone, is not necessarily a solution. We have to use they're going to use the tools against us, so we have to use the tools for the message, has always been my belief. But be conscious of it, right? I mean, I know that I don't send the message of sensitive information over Facebook. Like, if you do, and I see people do that all the time. They're talking, oh, I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do that. And I'm like, dude, this will be used in court. But I'm intimately aware of that because I've sat on trial in a courtroom and looked at my Facebook messages and posts projected in front of a jury. And so, like, we need a self-awareness of not paranoia, but just how data will be used and whether we're being careful. If you're talking about sensitive measures and resisting and doing things that they may call a crime, even if they're not a crime, you shouldn't be on a public channel. You should be using something that's secure and encrypted, or in a private room or whatever. And even those things aren't guaranteed secure, but they're a lot harder to get to.
Now, you've been very outspoken with exposing corruption within the police force. Have you experienced any major backlash, harassment, or targeting from any of these officers?
I mean, yes, I would say so. I ended up leaving my country permanently to avoid prison or being killed. So while I can't, it's difficult to say. Here's the problem. People like me, if you get out as an activist, you say, okay, I've done this for this many years. I'm getting arrested. I saw evidence of them trying to set up. I was here that the police were planting rumors, and I was receiving reports from other people saying, the police 100 miles away are saying, we think Gavin's going to go on a shooting spree. I mean, the kind of stuff that they will kill you over. And everybody will say, oh, thank you, officer, for saving us. So, I mean, even after I left, I found court documents where they tried to frame me on possession and distribution of methamphetamine. I've never even seen methamphetamine. I mean, there was actually a record of charges filed of methamphetamine possession and trafficking, and I was never arrested for them. And then apparently the charges were retracted because they decided not to use whatever they were planning. So absolutely, there was definitely targeting. And I think on the one hand, the more public and transparent you are, the harder you are to get to, because if you're, if you're the homeless guy that no one knows and no one's heard of, and you're standing up, it's easy for them to deal with you because no one will care, right? That's just the truth of the matter. So my theory was always, and still is, be public, make a video, show everyone. But there's a double-edged sword to that. It does make you more of a higher profile, and a higher profile person can be a little harder to erase, but it also makes you higher profile. So there's a downside to everything. And I mean, for example, in Mexico right now, I'm on national news because I walked through a restricted garden that was closed for this COVID-19. And I said, no, that's ridiculous. It's illegal. It's unconstitutional. And they said, you can't walk through the garden. And I said, yes, I can. Screw that. I'm walking through the garden. And so I mean, we've gone to a time where a few hundred years ago, we were literally in revolutions over our civil liberties. And now we're being shamed on the internet and on national news and controversy because we said, I have the right to walk through the public garden. So, I mean, we have to realize, I think, how far we've fallen. But I think there's always harassment when you stand up. And I think, you know, we can pick and choose our battles and how often and where. But at the same time, if we just stick our head in the sand and hide, we never have freedom. And that's the problem. We have so much cowardice. I see a lot of people, they chatter online, they make posts, but in reality, they don't remember, they always tell you how to do it better, but they never go out and do it themselves. And I'm like, you know what? If you can do it better, be my guest. Like, go, please. Because I think the principle that's missed is if everyone resists a little, no one has to resist a lot. And the reason that a few of us have to resist a lot and are put in danger and are becoming refugees and leaving our own country or going to prison is because everyone isn't resisting a little. If everyone said the first day that the government said, okay, you'll have to close your businesses, and everyone said, no, we don't, that's ridiculous, we're not doing it. Game over. The government just lost all their power, they have egg on their face, and now they have to backtrack and make a new narrative because no one's doing it. But if only one person says it, that person's going to jail, society paints him as a radical, he's smeared on social media. But I refuse to be shamed for standing up for myself or someone else's rights. I don't care what the sheep think. I mean, I care. It's never fun to be the butt end of hate and racism and xenophobism and all these things. And I've actually seen this in Mexico because I'm the outsider here. And so some of the people that are ignorant see me standing up and say, what is this foreigner doing here? You know, how dare he? He needs to follow the rules. And I'm like, no, you need to learn the law. You need to learn to respect human rights. You need to stop sucking on the teat of the government and start standing up. And I think people have to stop being afraid so much of what people think of them and just do the right thing. As long as you're not hurting anyone else, then speak out, stand up. And, you know, we should avoid violence. We should avoid being like them and becoming like them and being psychos like them. But that doesn't mean we can't push back and defend our rights.
Brilliant advice and a great description of what's going on. So it all took place in 2017 when you failed to appear at the Grant County District Court, charges of obstruction and harassment. That's very shocking. So, and then it led to you fleeing to Mexico. And what else transpired with those events, Gavin?
Well, really what was happening is it wasn't really about this one charge. These weren't terribly bad charges, but of course, the more things you get convicted of, and in the US courts, you always get convicted, nearly always, about 94% of the time, regardless of whether you're guilty, you get convicted. So the problem with this is once you've been convicted here, and then they convict you again, and they keep doing it more. But the problem, and I don't know if this is necessarily as bad in every country, but one day in jail can be a death sentence. I mean, we're seeing activists that get arrested for a burnt-out taillight and filming a cop, and the next day they hang themselves in their cell. So despite the fact that jail sucks, I was to the point where I'm like, no, I'm not going back to their jails. I'm not letting them have that level of control over me. I'm not their slave. I've done nothing wrong. And so really this was the culmination of years of knowing that, okay, if I keep standing up, eventually something's going to happen. I'm going to die, I'm going to go to prison, or I'm going to have to leave and get away from them. And so, I've been called a coward and every other name in the book because I didn't stay and go to the concentration camps. But I would say this to anybody in this situation, and I've dealt with a lot of people getting out of the USA since then because we've documented it. We've documented the process of obtaining refugee status in another country. And even, making all that official. And what I tell people is never let someone define you as a coward for your action while they're sitting still. No one gets to do that. No one gets to decide for you whether you're a coward. And we have these trigger words that we don't like people using, but the fact is there's no greater coward than the one who sits by and does nothing because they're afraid to do anything. So I have no problem. I mean, the USA was a nation founded by people who fled their country because of its corruption. And the fact is, most of history's prominent rebels and revolutionaries are in the same boat. I mean, Jesus and the apostles ran from the government all the time. So, I mean, whatever side you want to look at to find your examples, you're in good company if you flee the government. The idea that you should walk into a kangaroo court, into a concentration camp, and no offense to your kangaroos over there, but our courts are absolute kangaroo courts, and they're a joke, they're a sham. We laud, our justice system is lauded around the world as being orderly and professional and justice-based and jury-based, but the fact is the whole thing is rigged, and I've seen it firsthand. I've seen it in my friends. I have friends sitting in prison right now. So it's interesting because if you're an activist and you try to escape, like Schaefer Cox, for example, in the USA, if you try to escape and don't, you're a martyr and a hero, and he's sitting in prison. If you try to escape and do, you're a coward. So to a sheep, there's no winning. The people who simply want to be entertained will always just look for entertainment. And the fact is, it's better to be railed on by the cowards and the sheep who can't stand on their own 2 feet and say no. And let's remember, the reason people have to leave their country is because the people calling them traitors, cowards, lawbreakers, criminals, it's because the people calling them all the names are such cowards that they won't stand together and do a little bit so that the one person doesn't have to give everything.
That's exactly right. There's a lot of armchair and keyboard warriors.
Yes, for real.
They've got a lot to say, but until you walk a mile in somebody else's shoes, they shouldn't be so quick to judge. And as a high-profile identity in certain scenarios, they like to make an example out of people. So that's completely understandable to flee.
And they do it all the time. And so, yeah, I mean, there's never, at first I was thinking, I remember when I was leaving, because we left in like 48 hours, even though I kind of saw the handwriting on the wall for years, it finally got to the point where I'm like, no, we're done. We have court Friday. I'm not going in again. And the cutoff point for me was when they were trying to force me to unlock my phone and give them access so they could root around on it. I had no problem with the video getting out. I would still like that video to this day on the phone that they stole from me, because it was just another me. It was another Gavin video. It was fine. I have no shame in it. But the fact is, and we see this happening, and this is why you should always password protect your phones. You should never give up those passwords. So really, even though there was a lot of things involved, there was more things that came out afterward that validated the fact that I was ready to go. It was the hardest decision of my life. But the fact is, I said, I will not unlock that phone. And we're seeing cases where people are sitting in jail because they refused to unlock a device for the government, because the fact they sent this government to a high-profile decryption service and they couldn't unlock it.
It's such a shame an upstanding member of the public, such as yourself, was treated so unfairly by police. In 2014, you ran for the United States House of Representatives. Very impressive. Please tell the viewers a bit about your campaign.
It was very small, but I guess you could say that action kind of pushed me forward into activism and made me more prominent. It was a challenge campaign, so we had a very old school, traditional, good old boy sort of congressman in this district. It was kind of a rural area. And so I said, well, I'm going to challenge him because I'm sick and tired of this. Because, again, we have this thing of people, if you don't like it, if you don't like the laws, change them. If you don't like the laws, call your congressman. And over the years, I've come to realize if the laws are wrong, disobey them. Like you don't fix things by petitioning the very people you abuse them. Sure, if you can win a lawsuit against police, that's great. But that's not really going to change the system. What changes the government is fear. What changes the government is a people that will not allow them to abuse their neighbor. And we had that same, really my message was mostly the same then, maybe a little more informed now, but it was the same kind of thing. So what happened is this congressman was a sitting congressman, and I challenged the seat, and then he said, no, I'm not going to run, I'm retiring. And so then it was a feeding frenzy, right? So I was the first one to run for this race. Then there was like 12 candidates. And so it was interesting. It was a very good experience of practicing my articulation, because the fact that I was the first, even though I had hardly any money compared to these big corporate, state senators and stuff that were running for this federal seat, and they were getting hundreds of thousands, and I had, I think we raised $15,000 or something. But the interesting thing was, because we were honest and straight, it still kind of controlled the narrative of the debate. And so I would be at these debates with 1,000 people, and I had been going to Toastmasters for about a year then, just practicing my speech making skills and my trying to be concise, right? Not just rambling on when you're talking so they can take everything out of context. And I learned a lot about news media. I learned a lot about the debate. And the truth is, I don't think they let people like me win congressional seats because I was very clear, like, I won't comply with the gun laws. I'll resist them. I won't comply with the socialism. I won't comply with the police state. And basically, I ran on the platform, and I was doing activism at the time and posting videos on YouTube. So I was running on the platform of essentially an activist candidate. But what that did is by putting myself into that race, is it kind of pushed that narrative. It put that narrative out into the mainstream where there'd be a debate and the forum moderator would ask a question, and I would always redirect that question to, well, this is what the Constitution says, this is what our liberty is, and we have to take it. And I would do that pretty passionately, I think. And because of that, the other people would have to respond in that note because it made it exciting, right? People enjoyed those debates because I was always getting into it with the other statist candidates. And there was a few people that I think had some good ideas in there that we were mostly on the same page with. But in the end, of course, who won was the corporate good old boy that said nothing, that was owned by big agriculture. And that's who ended up winning the race with millions of dollars at the end of the day. So it's the same old, right? You aren't going to vote your way into freedom. I'm not going to say you should never vote. If you have somebody that's particularly a local candidate that's willing to fight for you, maybe give them a chance. I mean, voting is simply, in its essence, it's simply the community choosing an employee. And if those employees acted like employees, maybe we would have something. But because they don't, they act like kings, we end up in the same boat. So I no longer have the idea of if you don't vote, and it's been a long time since I had this today, but we're often presented with the idea of if you don't vote, you can't complain. That's rubbish. That's absolutely ridiculous. If there's somebody that you feel is worth putting your name behind, then fine, do that. That person probably won't win, particularly if you're awake and you actually know who you're voting for. But it's like the last presidential election. I said, no, I'm not voting for Trump. And they're like, oh, well, then you want Hillary. I'm like, no, Hillary's a psycho too. And that's been validated. I've never regretted. 6 months before the last presidential election in the USA, I was doing videos. I said, guys, Trump's not going to fix it. He's a charlatan. He's just going to play the game. He's just playing you the tune that you want to hear, so you'll elect him, and it's going to be the same crap. And a lot of those people are still saying, oh, no, it's just 4D chess. He's going to do it. He's fighting the system. I'm like, what are you talking about? He is the system, and he always was. And the fact is, this is the case with Obama. It's the case with Trump. It's the case with Hillary. It's the case with Biden. It's not going to change by voting. It's going to change by resisting. And the way you actually bring peace is by firm, peaceful resistance. And by peaceful, I mean you avoid violence as much as possible. I don't think it always means that you don't push back and say, hey, you're not beating anybody up today. You're leaving. And we see this a lot in Latin America, actually. When Latin Americans, they'll take a lot of crap. They'll take a lot of corruption. But in Latin America, if you study the culture, when they get really pissed, if they decide to protest as a community, politicians are running for the edge of town. And it's not because they just slaughter people in the streets like is often portrayed. The fact is most of their protests are peaceful in the real violent sense. That doesn't mean that the military, the police, or the government officials aren't going to be running out of town with water bottles, rocks, and tomatoes and escaping the people. I mean, the president, not the current one, the last president, by the end of his term was so detested by the people that he would roll into town and people would be chasing his car out of town, throwing rocks at him. I mean, if you did that in the USA, you would be shot. And so the culture of protesting is very different. I have a Venezuelan person that I know, and Venezuela, of course, is really struggling right now. They're in a lot of turmoil. There's a lot of refugees here from Venezuela. But they said in Venezuela, we have a common expression that translates, let's go burn the tires. And when in Latin America, they really mean that. Like, they will protest by putting tires and police cars in a pile in the middle of the road and lighting them on fire. And do I think our policy as moral, honorable men should be, let's go burn things down. Let's go do violence. No, I'm always going to be the guy, and I think any leader should be, that's an activist, needs to be the one that's saying, hold on, we're not here to kill anybody, we're not here to hurt anybody, we're not here to hate anybody, we're here to tell them they're no longer going to get away with being a bully. And I think that's really important if you look at history, because the tendency of people when they get angry enough is always to go rabid and to seek vengeance. French Revolution comes to mind, but you can look through this all through history, and you just end up becoming the villain you hate. I mean, the French Revolution is a perfect example of this. You know, now we're, instead of fighting for justice, we're slaughtering women and children in the streets because of what family they were born into. And so, and while in a lot of ways I admire the French, in the US, our culture kind of makes fun of the French because their language is very delicate, and, you know, they love their food and their sensuality and all these things. And so we point the finger because the US is a bully country. We're kind of a terrorist nation. So we're taught to kind of like, oh, look at them, they're pansy asses. The French are actually badass. And so I'm not here to pick on the French, but I think we have to look at our history. And the problem is, whether it's about viruses or police or government or revolutions, we never look at history. We're always acting with passion in the moment. And I think especially for people that are at the front of the line, leading the way, I think everyone should think for themselves and be accountable for their own actions. But the truth is, in history, there's always going to be people at the front of the line. And I think it's more important than anything that those people control themselves. I was talking to another activist from the States the other day, and he gets angry about all this stuff. And I said, you know, the most important thing, and as someone who's a Christian and has certain values and stuff, I believe this, but just as an activist, I don't think it matters if people believe like I do. I think you just have to look at history. And I said, if you're doing your activism and you're making your decisions based on anger, you will lose. And the reason I think that I've had these narratives and these viral videos and things in the past, it's not because I'm such a genius or because I'm so smart and I can avoid their technicals. Sure, I learned the law, I learned the facts, but I really always challenge myself, and still do, to say, you know what, I'm angry, that I can't respond based on that. I might tell them what I think, I might really be firm with them, and I do that in my videos here as well in Mexico. But if we react on our anger as a society, we're going to destroy our society.
Yes, we have to have presence of mind and be calm and collective, and especially when it comes to police encounters too, you have to assert your rights in a peaceful manner without going to extremes, because that's what they want as well, order out of chaos so they can introduce new laws. But
absolutely, then they can demonize you.
Exactly.
Yeah. And people will say, oh no, we got to use violence, stop being a pacifist. And I'm like, guys, this isn't going to work on me. Very few of you have been on the street looking down the gun, standing toe to toe with the terrorist more than I have. And I didn't need violence. And the fact is, if there was 1,000 of us there, and I've had that before also, we don't need violence. And it's like when we did our huge gun rally in 2014, this is before a lot of us started getting arrested, and there was a little more fire in our hearts, I guess you could say. But we openly defied these felony gun regulations, right? That people would have been getting arrested for if they simply went out and did it on their own. And there was thousands of us, and there was no violence. There wasn't even a scrap of litter left on the ground when we were done, because we really pushed the principle that I just mentioned. But the fact is, because we had numbers and we had some valor there, we made it clear, you're not crossing this line. And the fact is, government is listening and the people are listening. And so if people remember that and realize that the government is actually the ants and we're the rhinoceros, that doesn't mean we have to squish everything to fix the problem. We have to, really, the problem is people need to grow a pair of balls, stop making excuses, stop whining about their conspiracy theories, stop sharing all their memes and their deep state videos. I'm not saying all that stuff is wrong, but the fact is, if your entire message is a new conspiracy from day to day about how terrible it is, invariably the people that are obsessed with this, and that's all they do, they're never out on the street. And the problem is, people say, no, Gavin, look at this deep state conspiracy that involves Kennedy, wild apes, 5G, and that Australia isn't a real place. And I mean, this is really the way that people get thinking, because they get themselves into a position, they're so afraid to act, that they get themselves into a position where in their mind, their resistance and their courage is that they're sharing things that make them look intelligent, that they think no one else knows because no one else does know it, because sometimes they're so far out that it's crazy. And I'm like, guys, I'm not one to dismiss conspiracies, but there's a global conspiracy against our human rights right in front of us. It's not a theory. We have it on video. It's in our streets. It's in our legislative halls. Mm-hmm. You don't need to worry about all the obscure conspiracy theories that you're trying to prove. You need to get out on the streets and resist the one that's happening outside your door right now. Now, you live in Australia?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. But there's a lot of truth. There's a lot of truth to what you're saying there. You know, it's all good sharing information and highlighting certain facts, but unless you're one to actually put it into action, get out there and campaign, circulate petitions, hit the streets,
right,
go picketing and, you know, holding up signs and, you know, really put your words into place. That's very important. And what we're seeing is interesting. A lot of people are standing out the front of government buildings. They're doing what's called an audit, where they film to make sure the authority figures uphold their end of the law and there's no tactics being used. They go from facility to facility, NSA, TSA, fusion centers.
And those started with, you know, you got guys like James Freeman that do great videos, and people like James Freeman, I know them, and a lot of them have told me, you know, we just did what you did, and then we did it a little differently, right? And so the fact is, and it's a similar style. I remember, I think it was 2011 or 13 or something like that. I remember it clicking with me. I said, all the people are going out and they're making videos and they're saying, am I being detained? Am I being detained? Which is fine to say that. But I said, I remember thinking to myself at one point, maybe we're doing this wrong. What happens if right in front of them, I turn the camera back to me and ignore them and say, here's what's happening, guys. And that was a paradigm shift, at least for my activism. And I've kind of seen a lot of other people doing that. I'm not saying I'm the one that invented it, but it wasn't a common style then, where you go out and then you turn the camera around and you would make the narrative instead of simply pointing the camera, and you become the news. And we see a lot of auditors doing this. Sometimes I think that their language is too vulgar, they're too aggressive. You know, sometimes I think that they go too far, maybe for my style, but at the same time, I respect them, because I'm not here to dictate how everybody does their acting. As long as you're not hurting someone. I've always been very careful with how I speak and how I present myself, because I get crucified. Like sometimes I look at the auditors and I'm like, James Freeman, how do you get away with talking so aggressively? I try to be super polite and they say I'm super rude and then I'm a thug and then I'm a criminal. Like, what are you doing to get away with it? So, but I think the thing is, and I think this is something that's often forgotten, is we get stuck on faction, left versus right. And obviously we have principles that we have to stand with. But I've said for a long time, like, listen, if someone's standing with me, it's not my business if they're doing it exactly my way. I'm not here to control everybody. I'm not here to dictate laws for activists, right? As long as you're not violating the rights of someone else, you have the right to do it your way, and you'll bear the consequences for that way. And if you're standing up, you have my respect, even if I don't think that maybe it's the best tactic every time or whatever. And so you watch videos like Freeman, just hilarious sometimes the way he does it. And he does some pretty amazing work. There's a lot of other ones that have kind of stemmed from that and know him, and that's expanding. But they're demonizing them really bad in the States right now, and they're going to start going after them. And so for those auditors, they have to be careful. And my word of caution for that is, when you go out, I had a principle in activism, and I still use it, and it's the theory of the highest aggressor. And whoever the uninformed sees as the highest aggressor will be seen as the villain, generally speaking. So if you watch videos that go viral where people are outraged at the cops, why is that? It's because they did something that made them seem out of control. The cops can be murdering someone on the street, but if somehow in their mind even as stupid as it is, they see the person being murdered as the aggressor, they will side with the cop. And it's a shame that our society is this ignorant and that they don't think it through that much. But what I learned is that if you want to get views and entertain people and get a message out, you can do that. But when it comes to you being arrested and you're on the news, if you're seen as the aggressor, they will crucify you. And maybe you're fine with that. Maybe that's not what you're worried about. Maybe the sheep are irrelevant anyhow. I don't know. But I do know that if you want the narrative, I would always try to kind of do the good cop, bad cop. If they got aggressive, I would pull back and be like, "Whoa, bro, it's cool, man." And I would let them get aggressive, because if they were seen as the asshole, people understood the message better.
Yes, well said. And some people view it as antagonizing, or they're trying to instigate drama. But in essence, what they're doing is keeping them in check. And next time, if there's people out the front of a government agency, they might be less inclined to use these overbearing tactics, these standover control methods that they seem to get off on. So by keeping them accountable.
I mean, we have a right to antagonize the terrorists that are roaming our streets, right? These parasites are just terrorizing and robbing our communities. And if antagonism is what it takes to expose them, that's not necessarily wrong. Again, I just think we should always question ourselves. And this is something I've always done in my videos, is always asking myself after I have an encounter, did I do that right? Could I have done it better? And also, why did I do it? It's very common where I would see a video and no one else would ever know, but I might say, that part there was my ego, right? And I know that's a bad idea because I know where it is. And so I think we should always self-analyze. I shouldn't think we should hold ourselves to a high standard, but I think at the same time, everybody's got to develop their own personality for how they do it, as long as they're respecting the rights of others. I think that's the foundation.
Well said. Well, I admire all your work. You've got tremendous courage, holding these corrupt police, holding their feet to the flames. Well done. And you're more than welcome back on the show anytime. We need more people like yourselves with a clean reputation, entering politics, ones that aren't compromised or bought and paid for. So it's very reassuring. Awesome.
Thanks for having me on. It's been fun.
Well, that does it for today's show. We're really being hit with a barrage of attacks, so now is an excellent time to show your generosity and become a patron and help keep this operation running. But we'll leave it there for today, and I'll catch you next time on the We Are Change talk show, where we expose corruption one episode at a time.